Here's a quick pro tip on how to reinstall the drive gears on a Honda HRR lawnmower. You might just be replacing the wheels or the drive gears, or you just took it apart and you have no clue how to put it back together. This will also help troubleshoot if the lawnmower will not roll backwards or just won't move at all. This applies to most transmissions on lawnmowers, so you might be in luck. Safety first, go ahead and unplug that spark plug. And don't forget to shut off that fuel. So before we go any further, throughout this video when we're referring to left and right hand, it's always going to be based off the operator's position. For example, this will be our right hand and this will be our left hand. Since we're going to be removing the rear wheels, find something secure to lift up the rear end. And in the front, find a clamp or something to keep it from rolling forward. And go ahead and remove the rear wheel, set it to the side in a safe place, and keep all the parts intact. From reinstall to install, it should go on in this order. Now for this next step, you will need a pair of snap ring pliers. Remove the first snap ring on the outside, then remove the thrush washer or spacer. Next, we're going to remove the gear spur itself, but please note the dot. This is going to come in reference later, and very important feature. Remember the position of this dot. So when pulling off the gear spur, there's two things you need to be cautious of. Do not lose the spring inside, and do not lose the keyway or the ward of key that's spring loaded inside the gear spur. It's going to want to go shooting across the room. Don't lose it. With the gear spur completely off, you can go ahead and remove the dust cover. And here's the spring that I was referring to earlier. It's a tiny little guy, but it has a very important purpose. Do not lose this spring. Last but not least, the last washer or thrush washer. Go ahead and remove it. Now, if everything came off in that order, then you're correct. Go ahead and reinstall as is. You're good to go. Now, for those of you that are in this position or starting position and you're completely lost, go ahead and start off with a thrush washer. Next, the all tiny and mighty spring. Go ahead and reinstall that. Go ahead and apply some gear lube or axle grease or assembly lube. That'll keep it nice and seated inside there. Followed up by the keyway or ward of key. I'm just going to call it a keyway. That's what I've always called it. It should be nice and centered in there. The round part is facing down, and it should be nice and springy. It should have tension, and it should just be resting there, waiting for the gear spur. And don't forget the dust cover, because if you forget this step, you can't reinstall it without taking the gear spur back off. Now it's time to reinstall the gear spur, and here's where the important part comes in. Remember that dot from earlier? Yes, that dot right there, it needs to be facing out or facing right. Remember, right hand and left hand, this dot needs to be facing to the right. With the dot facing outward or facing to the right from the operator's position, go ahead and reinstall the gear spur. At the same time, you're going to want to tuck in the ward of key or keyway so it slides under there, and it should slide right in. Go ahead and give it a quick little spin, and it should ratchet, and it should be correctly installed now. A little way you can always remember which way the gear spur goes is the shark fin is always swimming forward. That's the best way I show my kids, and they never forget it. Like I said earlier, make sure that it's ratcheting. It's making an actual click sound. If that thing is not ratcheting or springing up and down, you need to replace your spring, or your spring is broken. You may not notice it physically or visually, but most of the time, if that's not ratcheting, it's time to replace the spring. If you're in a pinch and you don't have a spring, find a clicky pin or one of those ballpoint pin that's spring loaded in your house. Disassemble the pin, and you could use the spring in there temporarily till you get the correct part. Go ahead and reinstall the last thrush washer. And finally, the snap ring. Make sure that it is seated in the proper position. Give it a good tug, twist. It should not pop off. If it does pop off, you need to replace the snap ring with the proper size or just a new snap ring. Now it's time to move to the left-hand side. Everything's going to be the exact same order, so we're not going to disassemble it here. We're just going to simply remove the wheel and make sure that this gear spur on this side, the dot is facing the correct position. So just double check your work. We're on the left-hand side. We're going to go ahead and remove the snap ring. We want to make sure we don't see any dot on this side. That's the whole purpose of showing you the left-hand side. The dot on the left-hand side should not be visible. It should be on the inside facing right. So when we pull this gear spur off, the dot should be facing on the inside. Now, if you're confident you can't see a dot on the left-hand side, by all means, don't pull this apart. Just take an ocular test and make sure it's not facing there. But to be sure, go ahead and flip it over, and there it is. There's your dot. Should be facing on the inside. So when we reinstall this, we'll flip it back over, make sure the dot's facing to the right and pointing to the inside. Or remember, the shark fin is always swimming forward. And go ahead and reassemble everything on the left hand side and make sure that she's clicking, she's ratcheting, same rules apply to the right. And of course the outer thrust washer and the most important part, the snap ring. Make sure that it's secure just like you checked on the right hand side and it doesn't go anywhere or pop off. And before reinstalling the wheel, make sure that the washers go in the following order. Go ahead and start with your axle bolt and the shoulder bolt, and then you're going to want to start with your flat washer first, followed up by the wave washer, and make sure that the wave washer is facing up, the round side is facing down towards the wheel. Now you're ready to reinstall the wheel. Go ahead and tighten it down, and when putting on the wheel, make sure that it goes in all the way. It should come in contact with the gear spur on the wheel and the transaxle, and then give it a couple spins. Now it should not roll backwards very easily. It should put up some resistance. On the flip side, it should roll forward very freely. So that way you know you got it right. Backwards, resistance, forward, freely. Now if you get this thing all put back together and she's still fighting you and doesn't want to roll forward, next thing you need to check is the bushings on the height adjusters. There's a bushing in here, not this, this is the dust shield. There's a bushing inside that height adjuster and it's plastic. And what happens is over time it wears out. Once it wears out, it becomes metal to metal and it really puts up friction and it's very hard to move. A telltale sign that the bushings are completely worn out is the rear wheels will be at a 45-degree angle or like a racing camber. They'll be sagging really bad. That way you'll know the bushings are bad. Now you got a couple options when replacing these bushings. You could find them on Amazon. It's been a while, so I don't know if it's still available, but you can replace just the plastic bushing inside here for $9. If you can't find it online, you'll have to replace the whole height adjuster, which comes with a new bushing and a new dust cap. If the bushings look good and they look fairly decent and reusable, next up, check the gear spurs. You want to make sure that these things check out and they don't look like a worn out pair of dentures. And here's how Father Time is still undefeated. Here's a new gear spur I replaced a couple years ago, and here's the old one. Look how worn down that is. If your gear spur looks like this, you need to replace it. It's no longer making contact with the wheel. These are a little easier to find online. There are plenty available. Just make sure you get the right size. And I do recommend getting an OEM part. Keep it OEM as much as possible. And there are enticing aftermarket parts out there. You can see this aftermarket kit comes with springs and clips. Just beware. And lastly, and probably the most important part, and I hate to say it, but please make sure there's a gosh darn belt on this thing that makes this whole operation functional. I hate to say it, but you never know. If there's no belt there, well, there's your problem. Remember, just a real quick review, right side, dot. The dot should be visible on the right side. On the left side, no dot. There should be no dot visible on the left side. Like always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you out. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me, and I know you got this.